in this part, we're going to talk a little bit more about what our managed service is specifically and the tool sets that we use. It's going to be a little bit more about the technical solution and what you provide over the top of that. So as you all hopefully already know, we do feature Microsoft Sentinel as our SIEM of choice, but we do also provide Elastic. This is going to the overarching service will be applicable to both solutions, but the technical architecture is going to be a little bit more about Microsoft Sentinel because that's where primarily where most of our customers are. Okay, so managed service on top. So we now know what a managed SOC is, but what does that actually provide the customer? So no particular order, but the deployment and onboarding is a huge factor of that. You know, we've spoken about the return on investments in previous sections and things like that. We've managed to build a process which we will be working towards for future customers, whereby we're looking to onboard them within 6 to 7 weeks. That does sometimes change depending on the size of the environments, what type of architecture is there, whether the customer is actually engaged with us, because sometimes an organization will look for a SOC just as a tick box exercise. Once it's deployed, they don't really care. They're not the types of customers that we really build true partnerships with. We're looking for the ones that get more involved, which does tend to have a knock-on impact of extending the onboarding timeframes, but we manage those. So threat intelligence is another huge benefit to a outsourced managed service rather than an in-house. Threat intelligence can be very costly. You know, whenever you go out to look at threat intelligence from places like Mandiant or CrowdStrike or wherever, there's a bottom line of it starts at 100 grand. You just have to expect that. So for us, paying that £100,000, you know, we can spread that across multiple customers. It makes sense. Economies of scale work. Doing that on a in-house solution, generally, they're not going to have a good source of threat intelligence. Now, commercial threat intelligence isn't just the only source of threat intelligence. There are 2 other primary sources which we ingest, and that's open source. That's anything that we find on the internet, and quite often that's the most up-to-date, bleeding edge, whatever you want to call it. That is where we get the most use of threat intelligence, and that could be things from Twitter, it can be Bleeping Computer, wherever it may be, but they are valuable sources which we ingest. There are open source feeds specifically that can pipe stuff into customers' environments, but generally they are very noisy and you take it with a pinch of salt. The other source is our internally investigated and identified threat intelligence. That's where perhaps the red team is identifying, you know, new vulnerabilities or IOCs, which we can then take and spread across our customer. Really, really helpful, and something that I really hope we build upon in the future. But there is huge value to having a threat intelligence-led SOC. You know, understanding those 0-day compromises, what the IOCs are, being able to detect on them very quickly.
What happened with MISP?
MISP, it's noisy, it's open source, it's useful, we can ingest it. But as I say, you take it with a pinch of salt. It's generally with threat intelligence, you'll have an IOC like an IP address, it'll get added to MISP. We'll ingest that into our SOC. But the expiry time on that IP address, which an IP address is a throwaway item these days, is extended too long. So we'll still be firing on it. A great example of that is probably around April last year, somebody added in an IP address, which was probably a valid threat intel source at some stage, but then very quickly, New York Times spun up some services on their advertising panel, which used that IP address because it was just an Azure IP address or an AWS IP address that's recycled quite often. you'd be surprised at how many websites you go to where New York Times are actually advertising. So for us as a SOC, we were getting every single user within every single customer firing an alert at us all at once, and we just had to ignore it all because it was too much for us to investigate. So Mist can be useful. It's very noisy. You have to be careful with it, and just caution, I guess. Customers do also like to have the story about threat intelligence and why we use it, how it works well for them, and things like that. So in a sales opportunity, that's a area which I tend to talk about quite a lot. Configuration management, that's ongoing management of the SIEM. You know, it's not a set and forget tool. There is constant development, whether it be from the security use cases, the threat intelligence, whatever it may be. We still need to adjust things in the SOC. And with our service, we're continually doing that. It's not just a point of us onboarding them and then we kind of don't develop it further. We are constantly developing things. And if we develop things for one customer, as I mentioned earlier, we'll generally push it out to the rest of our customer base as well. So everybody benefits. The obvious 24/7 real-time monitoring. You know, we do have hands-on keyboard, eyes on screen, 24/7, which many SOC providers will state they have, but generally they might not. So again, that is a true benefit to us. We have that real 24/7 monitoring capability. A lot of organizations will just say we're 24/7 and they get somebody out of bed if there's a high alert or something like that, but that misses an awful lot. So there's a huge advantage to the model we've got and the way that we take it to our customers. Spoken a lot about security use cases. That is continually developed over the period of the contract with our customers, and that's where we're generally having open and honest conversations with our customers and building that partnership, getting involved with how they're developing their internal infrastructure. And it's a brilliant opportunity for account managers to have a input into those sessions, because there's other opportunities that could be won at the same time. So as an organization is moving from, let's say, on-prem services into Azure, then the security use cases are going to change. We're going to have to develop various different other detection rules or whatever it may be during that period. So again, security use cases are continually developed over time. Proactive threat hunting. We've spoken about this previously. At the minute, generally, we're kind of scheduled to perform these on a monthly basis with our customers, but we do them quite a lot more than just that single time. A threat hunt, we generally collect an awful lot of information within a SIEM. That SIEM is developed to fire on specific triggers that happen as the data comes into the SIEM. Doesn't necessarily detect things like 0 days, which would have happened maybe a month ago. Somebody's taken advantage of that and attached that 0 day.
Because you wouldn't have set up the rule.
We wouldn't have had the rule to detect it. So what a threat hunt does is it says, right, well, this 0 day is now public. We know what it is. We know what they're doing. We have the TTPs.
Right.
We're going to go back and search across the data that we've already collected to find out whether there's anything that has happened. And if there is, then obviously we react to it appropriately.
So that's like a retrospective.
Well, you're looking for latent threats that are already in the environment, and to go actually talk about the dwell time. Are there attackers dwelling within my environment that I don't know about? And I'm like, how can I go and look at for the command and control service that they may be connecting to? How do I go and look for, now that they've been made public, do I retrospectively look at some of the historical data for the types of services they exploit? We've got this out of date and unpatched system. It's become known that they are exploiting that system and they're using old Linux servers, that kind of thing.
Can you look for that in the current data you've got, or would you need the logs from at the time the 0 day was kind of came into their environment? If the log retention policy isn't long enough, there's a chance you might not see it.
Potentially, yeah. But hopefully you're going to see something. If there had been an incident after the log retention had run out, hopefully you'll still see evidence
something you
of
should be able
that
to still find.
breach. So yeah, generally we normally collect at minimum 90 days worth of data. Hopefully we'll be able to identify something from that. But yeah, it's just essentially going back over old ground and looking for indicators of compromise. We'll generally look to perform these in a scenario-led basis. So we'll understand the 0 day, what they're doing, and then we'll try and find it based on that. So sorry, incident analysis. So incident analysis is our people and process part of the solution, right? The tooling has done its job. It's fired an alert to us. We are now monitoring what's happening with that alert. We're looking to see whether it's a false positive or not. And generally, we do a lot of work to look at the data in and around that alert. So we'll look at the IP address. Is it a known IP address to threat actors and various other sources? And if it is, then that increases the risk and the severity of the incident. So again, our team is very well experienced in understanding how to enrich that data and make sure that we're making good decisions to either escalate it to a customer or not. Customer mature playbooks, again, that goes hand in hand with analysis. So a playbook is generally a set procedure that we will follow if something happens. And you can imagine this with something like a malware outbreak. This is what we're supposed to do in a malware outbreak. It means that we can get through these stages a lot faster in an agreed manner with our customers, and everybody knows what's supposed to have happened. Really critical to the SOC, and something that generally we've got a library of about 15 mature playbooks that we will use across all of our customers, but then there's specific playbooks that will build towards the specific new security use cases or whatever it may be. And then obviously there's the incident response. Now, as a SOC, this does get a little bit complicated and sometimes misunderstood. The whole term MDR, or managed detection and response, is sometimes overlooked as well, I don't need an incident response retainer. I don't need an incident response team if I do get breached because I've got a SOC. Well, the SOC isn't there to follow a full-on incident response all the time. Yes, there may be specific hours built into the contract, but we're not going to be sitting there doing digital forensics from a SOC solution. Generally, the incident response aspect of a SOC is an initial incident response, which or initial response, which is something that I mentioned earlier. That will be generally dictated by the playbooks that have already been agreed with the customer as well. So we'll have an authority to act with a customer that states that we can perform these types of actions, and then we'll bake them into our playbooks. So Microsoft Sentinel, it is a top right Magic Quadrant organization up there with people like Splunk, QRadar, and others. Generally, from my perspective, it is, and I've looked at multiple SIEM solutions, it is probably the best one out there on the market. What doesn't feature on Gartner quite, I don't know whether it will do this year, is Google Chronicle, which I think might be a competitor to Microsoft, if not this year, next year maybe. So how does Microsoft Sentinel work? It takes logs from multiple different sources, and it uses machine learning, AI, and all those other great buzzwords to bring out that high fidelity alert. And that's really what we want. What we don't want, and which traditional SIEM solutions tend to generate alerts, is by creating individual alerts for different actions. With Microsoft Sentinel, we're trying to amalgamate multiple actions within that user's infrastructure, or the virtual machines, or whatever it may be. We drill down on lots of different bits of information and bring out one high fidelity alert, and then group the alerts outside of that so we can investigate it further, which again is a very different way to the traditional means of using SIEM. Sorry, I'm just firing through these because I'm going to have to leave at 2. But The way that Sentinel works, as I say, it is a cloud solution, and this does take some explaining, but essentially there's always going to be this aspect of the customer's infrastructure, whether it's already in Azure or not, it's irrelevant. But what we're looking to do is acquire and prepare the data from each different log source. As I said earlier, we can fire lots of data into Sentinel. If it's not in the right format, or if it's irrelevant to us, then it's just going to cost us money and be meaningless. So what we do is the prepare phase, where we're formatting the logs, and before it gets ingested into Sentinel, we're saying, right, don't forward that bit of log because we don't need it, but actually we want this log because that's valuable to us. So we've got great experience in being able to do that. Then obviously Microsoft Sentinel, that is in the Azure tenancy of the customer, and that is also a point that we need to explain to our customers. Microsoft, a SIEM solution traditionally has been sold as a bit of hardware that sits in a data center, perhaps offered by the MSSP or MSP, and the customer just utilizes part of that. Microsoft Sentinel is actually in that customer's tenancy. So if they severed ties from us, they would still have Microsoft Sentinel, and it would still operate in that way. But obviously, if that were to happen, then they won't get any of the advantages of us continually developing it. What we use is something called Microsoft Lighthouse, which isn't illustrated on here, but Microsoft Lighthouse enables us to punch a wall into the customer's Azure tenancy and see specific objects within it, and specifically Microsoft Sentinel, which is relevant to us. And we take the feeds from Sentinel and bring them up as alerts into our ticketing system, and then we communicate back to the customer. So that's kind of an overall helicopter view of the architecture. Can become more complex, but generally those types of conversations would be handled with me or the engineering team, rather than expecting you guys to try and work them out for the customer. So deployment, we have spoken about previously as being some customers, perhaps we haven't spoken about it actually, sorry. Some organizations will become very protective over their infrastructure, and they won't want us to deploy the services on their behalf. Other customers will say, I'm not a technology company, I don't know what I'm doing, here's the keys to the kingdom, off you go and do it. Our preferred route is to be given the keys to the kingdom and get it done ourselves. It's a lot more efficient, we can get it done a lot quicker, we don't have to rely upon resources within that organization. However, we have processes in place, and we'll go through screen shares and whatever else to be able to deploy alongside an organization. This is always something that I would love us to be kind of making sure we make clear and perhaps decide before the customer signs on the dotted line, because it makes our lives a hell of a lot easier once we get to the deployment stage. So next time we have this type of opportunity, we'll talk about how that works and where we go with things. And then final slide is just going over the deployment deployment project plan and kind of what that looks like, how it works. So generally there's three real main milestones: the planning and design. Again, we would have done a lot of this during the opportunity stage, but there's still more to do after they're signed on the dotted line. Then we're going to go into the implementation, where we're really deploying services, we're talking to them about security use cases, and we're getting things ingested and set up correctly. And we've got the post-deployment and testing. And that really is about testing before we go live, making sure that we've got all of the runbooks in place, so we know what things do, what to do when, and who to escalate things to, and to make sure that the permissions that they've provided to us are going to work appropriately in the middle of the night. Brilliant. So that is it for me. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to.